What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Progressive Gentleman Podcast. As always, we're your hosts. I'm Dan.
I'm Matt.
And thank you for taking the time to nerd out about music with us. And sorry it's been so damn long.
Yes.
It's, we set out to sort of make this year the year of content, right? That's kind of how we phrased it. And we started off real strong. And, life comes at you fast sometimes. And
Yeah, a lot of unexpected life things and busyness and that stuff.
We definitely want to keep doing this and do it as much as we can, and so it's definitely not lost on us that we've been gone for a long time. We miss doing this stuff, and we're glad that we were able to find time to do this episode here. And as always, this episode is brought to you by Eargasm Earplugs. Use code Gentleman10 at checkout and get a good discount and protect your hearing today. But yeah, it sucks that we can't do this as often as we want. I'd love to do this stuff every week.
Yeah, it would be awesome if we could. Maybe one day we'll get there.
Maybe someday. But, thank you guys for your patience, and thank you for listening to this episode.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, exactly. One other thing we want to mention too is we're trying to kind of start to build up our YouTube presence. That's something that we've talked about in the past, and we haven't really taken many steps to doing that. But we do have a YouTube page. We're planning to do some live streaming content. All of our band interviews and stuff are already over there. All of our podcast content is actually already over there. So
yeah,
if you look us up, Progressive Gentleman on YouTube, and we'll share links to our story as we're trying to sort of build this up more. But our gaming channel is also already moving over there.
And it's all on one page too, so you can find it all in one-stop shop.
Yep, exactly. So we might actually start doing some of these episodes as videos as well, and just to sort of increase our presence on YouTube and make it a little bit more YouTube friendly. People would, I don't know why anyone would rather see our faces, but who knows? I feel like that type of stuff usually does better on YouTube than just audio. So, so definitely, if you could go give us a subscribe on YouTube, we'd really appreciate it. I think we've not really advertised it much. I think we're approaching 40 subscribers. That's obviously not a lot, but
considering we've done very little to advertise the YouTube, that's pretty cool. So thank you for everyone who's already come and subscribed to it.
Yeah, and we've had some interaction on there already, as well as with some of the interviews, the Exploring Birdsong interview, the Jim Gray interview. So go check those out, and if you haven't already, those are some of our favorite episodes. So go check those out on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you're listening to us. And
the band, actually, we didn't mention this, but the band interview ones are actually video recorded ones, so you can see video content there. It's not just the audio feed.
Yeah,
whereas the rest of the podcast ones are just an audio feed with a static image. But like Dan said, we may incorporate the video into the future episodes.
Yeah, just gotta.
In case you would like to see our faces,
we just gotta get hair and makeup people. Just go full professional with it. But
makeup.
But anyways, today's episode is one that we've had a couple of our followers reach out and express interest in us doing something like this, because I have frequently expressed that I've not really ever done a major dive into Tool's discography. I've obviously heard all the big tracks. That's kind of unavoidable. I guess I have all kinds of thoughts to say with a lot of this stuff, but I guess, back my sort of progression with music was I did listen to 90s alt rock grunge sort of earlier on, and some Tool was mixed in with that, but I never went down the rabbit hole because I wasn't a big music, I loved music, but I wasn't as crazy about it as I am now. And then progressed sort of to new metal, Linkin Park, stuff like that, which then sort of pushed me into early iterations of metalcore, deathcore, hardcore, death metal, which then I went into progressive metal. Then I somehow sort of backpedaled into progressive rock. And that's kind of where I am today. So it's like somehow on that journey to where I am today, I did not detour to Tool ever. So, and
it's funny that like was never a spot for you.
Yeah. And like, I wasn't as like open-minded with music and musicians and stuff like that. So back then, like I was not a fan of, like I knew who Maynard was. I was not a fan of his existence, which may have also played a role in why I never sort of took a deeper dive. But, we had a lot of people reach out, suggesting that we do like an artist spotlight for Tool. And I looked at it like, okay, well, this is an excuse for me to do a dive into their discography, which is I've never done. So that's kind of where I was leading up to this. I don't know where you were, Matt, what your experience was with Tool before this.
Yeah, I guess kind of similar, but to you, but maybe had a little bit more exposure to them. Like our one friend from high school, Kevin, he made me like a burned me a CD called Pure Metal Enjoyment that just had like a random collection of different subgenres of metal and rock too and stuff. And I actually, there might have been a few hip hop tracks on there too, but it was predominantly metal stuff. And he had several Tool songs on there, and that was probably like my first time listening to them, outside of maybe hearing like something on like the radio or whatever, because but I got to hear some of those songs, and so I did like a little deeper of a dive, I guess, but they weren't a band that I listened to like their whole discography ever or anything, like had never heard the majority of their songs. Like I probably heard about a collective like number of tracks to make up one album between all of them, up until Fear Inoculum, their most recent album. That one I did listen to the whole way through, and it kind of got me back into Tool for a little bit. And then now that they haven't like really released anything since, I kind of fell off again. So this was a nice way to like re-listen to Fear Inoculum and then also do a deep dive to their older albums that I didn't really spend a lot of time with.
It's always felt like a little bit blasphemous to me that like that we haven't, or specifically I haven't ever like really given them a shot. Like, so I mean they're held in such regard in the progressive music world, and they've inspired so many bands that I would say are some of my favorite bands. So it was always in the back of my head, like I should go do this. And this just sort of gave me the push to do it.
Yeah, I honestly at the time, like everything I had heard, I liked and had listened to those tracks like quite a bit. And so I don't know why I never went and like did the deeper dive into their discography. It was just kind of like a weird thing where it's like, I guess I was just discovering other music that sort of grabbed me more, and then I kind of got like, ooh, shiny red ball, and was like, look over here, and just kind of kept forgetting. It's like, oh, I'll come back to Tool. And
I wish I would have discovered them more when I was in that like 90s grunge phase, because I feel like it would be really interesting to see like my music progression if Tool had become like a band that I was really listening to like in the early 2000s, when I was listening to like when I was big into like Soundgarden and Audioslave and Pearl Jam and Nirvana and like all those big grunge acts. It would have been interesting to see like, oh, well, now I'm listening to this progressive band that blends a lot of those elements, and it's like, where would I have gone? And even before the grunge stuff, like I listened to a lot of Queen and Rush and Pink Floyd and Yes, and King Crimson, and it's like it's
Yeah,
interesting.
Tool would have
I
been
don't
like
know
the good
how.
gateway
Yeah,
blend
like
between the two.
I just don't know how that didn't happen. And I didn't have a lot of like growing up. I didn't have a lot of friends that listened to the same like had the same music interests. Most like until I moved out to Mars and like met you guys and sort of. But at that point, we had already sort of evolved past that, and we're kind of in that early metalcore phase. So
Yeah.
it was like I skipped that part. Like I was never really introduced to it at the right time. So I mean, now I'm glad that I've been able to do this because I will kind of come out and say I definitely feel like I am a fan now.
Yeah, I
And
agree. Like at first, I kind of when we were going through it, it was like, oh, this will give me like basically like an assignment to do it, and it's like I want to, but like now that we're doing it for an episode, like I have a purpose and like a time frame slapped on it, so it's like more likely that I will do it. And at first, like starting it was like, oh, this is a lot of albums, and they're older albums too, so it's like, are these going to be any good now? I was kind of worried about and wasn't sure how I was going to kind of feel outside of the songs I had heard that I enjoyed, and Fear Inoculum obviously. But coming out of it is like, oh yeah, it still holds up, it's still good. I mean, there's some tracks on there that are rougher sounding and stuff, and kind of like interlude tracks that like I don't really understand. I mean, maybe with more listens it would hit with me, but some of them, was like, I could skip this. But overall, like I enjoyed my time with the Tool discography.
yeah, I mean, at times I felt like I was like reverse engineering some of my favorite like modern prog stuff. Like I was discovering like an ingredient to the recipe that is the music that we listen to today. Like it was interesting like having those types of revelations where it's like, oh wow, like listening, and I guess I don't know if I want to wait until we're actually talking about specific records, but like listening to some of it, I'm like, oh, this could be a Haken record. Like this could be this like I hear a lot of Chevelle in this. I hear a lot of Deftones in this. I hear a lot of like I
Yeah.
can see how this could have inspired Between the Buried and Me. Like I can see how this could have inspired bands like even like Coheed or Deer Hunter or like all these prog rock bands. Like not even necessarily the style, but the structure and like there's just a lot of things that and also I mean I was talking about Chris Cornell, Audioslave, Soundgarden. Like he's even come out and basically said in interviews back in the day that like he was just a prog rock nerd and stuff bands like Tool and stuff like were inspirations to him even. So it's like especially on like that Audioslave project. So it's like it's interesting to sort of go back and discover your influences.
Yeah, it is. And it was cool to like just kind of knowing the music of that time and like then going back and listening to these albums that we hadn't heard really from those time frames. So like, talking about the grunge stuff, it's like, their first three albums being 90s albums and having a lot of that grunge influence. It was like, got a lot of like hints of like, oh, this sounds kind of like Bush or Live, like those type of bands. So it was like it has that kind of sound, but like more proggy a bit,
Yeah.
and stuff. So it was kind of cool to like see. Oh, I can see kind of like that whole era had this kind of influence. But then, like you said, also seeing that, like, oh, well, if you go further, you see bands like Chevelle that sort of have a lot of Tool influence behind them. So it's kind of like you can like see all of the influences, in both directions.
Yeah, it's definitely made me want to do this more with other sort of not older quote unquote older bands that like other bands that have been sort of well documented to have influenced a lot of the modern Dream Theater. Like I feel like we should like I still want to do that. That's probably a major like massive undertaking. This was
Yeah.
doing Tool was like 5 records and that was that's a lot, but it's cool to sort of sit there and listen and try to pick up parts that you feel may have inspired, some of the more modern records that we sort of revere.
Yeah,
But
I like doing that. Like we could even do like a Rush one as well, like do
yeah,
some more of the
King Crimson would be cool.
yeah,
But all right, let's jump in. Let's talk a little bit about. We're gonna try to step through the releases one at a time and just
like
talk a little bit
chronologically.
about them. Yeah, we don't need to like. We're not trying to like fully dissect them here. We'll be sort of open with the process. We listened to. We listened through the discography probably once, right? I
Yeah.
replayed some songs.
Same, like I went through them all like one song at a time from beginning to
Yeah,
end chronologically, and then I went back and like cherry picked a handful that I really liked and listened to them again and tried to get a
yeah,
little more out of it. But yeah, we crammed all that in like this week in
yeah. And
preparation for the episode. So
I know the Tool fan base is very rabid too, so I just want to preface this with like we are not experts by any means. We are fans of music. We like to, jump into this stuff. I don't want to pretend like, you know,
yeah, we are
I
not
know all.
we're not I don't know, tool heads. I don't know what you
Yeah,
call.
and we came into this very, as we kind of already explained, but we came into this process very you know, green, so to speak, on Tool, like as far as our knowledge on their music and stuff like that. So, and I did not have any time by any means, any time to sort of dive into the different, lyrical nuances and stuff like. I did not analyze the lyrics whatsoever. I read some of them as we were listening to songs. I was like, I'm not even gonna try. And
Yeah. Yeah, I tried to like read along to lyrics when I could, but some of it was listening to it in the car, like on the drive to work, from work, whatever. So there were certain times where I couldn't do that, and like I know there's a lot of extra like sort of like Tool extended universe stuff that goes beyond just like straight up the lyrics and stuff. So a lot of that'll be missed on us for now. Maybe after
yeah,
this we'll do some deeper dives and get into it more and become, the tool heads.
yeah. No,
But
I've already added a lot of the songs from these records as I've gone through to different playlists, and including our Gentleman Essentials playlist, which you can find on Spotify, and there's links in our bio. But
it's on
anyways,
Apple Music too.
oh, it's now on Apple Music. I forgot about
Hey, I
that.
spent like 3 hours adding each song manually. But
So go
we
ahead
got
and go give those playlists a follow if you're interested. But all right, so the Opiate EP, released in 1992. This is their first sort of dive into recorded music.
we were both but wee babies.
Yes, I was one.
I may have been two depending on what month this came, but
But
likely one.
so I had never heard anything off of this EP before. Like we kind of said, oh yeah, we've heard bits and pieces or full songs or all the popular songs, whatever. Prior to going into this, I had never heard anything off of this record, and
Yeah, this
my
was one too that I hadn't. I knew of the song "Opiate," but like that it existed, but I don't think I had ever heard it prior, and
yeah
didn't recognize any of the other tracks either.
my initial take on this record, and this is where I started too. I started in chronological order, so this actually like. And we just sort of hyped a lot, so I'm not trying to like take the mood down a little bit. But my initial take on it was kind of underwhelming for me. Not bad by any means. Like I'm not saying that this was shit, but it was just kind of underwhelming. But I put a note down. I was like, well, everyone's got to start somewhere, and that's kind of where like. And again, it's better than anything I could ever write. So I'm not trying to be like, oh, I could do better than this, but. It still had some cool riffs and cool moments. Like the intro riff to the song "Jerk Off" was pretty cool. But to me, this was more of like a pretty straightforward, like '90s alt rock, alt metal type record.
Yeah, it
Not
had a
much.
very grunge sound to it.
Yeah, which for the times it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
But didn't get much of a prog vibe, which might have been by design. It's not like I don't think most prog bands don't like really set out to be like, oh, we're gonna make a prog record. Like I think they just make the music they want to make.
And it just happens to be
And it right.
lumped into progressive.
Right. So that's kind of what I figure happened here. It's still good, but nothing major. Like the title track is obviously probably the most standout track of the record, but
Yeah, I agree with that. That was my favorite track on the EP.
but I'm probably not necessarily going to go back and ever listen to that EP again if I'm being completely honest. Um, I didn't dislike it. It just kind of it was okay for me. But yeah, I don't have too many deep thoughts on it other than it was like meh, it was all right.
Yeah, I it definitely was like, it was a high energy album, which I think was like probably at the time, because I think from what I read was they formed in 91, so they put out an EP within the first year of like forming their band, and it was like real high energy. So I'm sure this probably like got a lot of listenership and like got a lot of hype, like, oh, this Tool band, up and coming, they put out an EP and stuff, probably did a lot for them. But I agree, it was like it's a bit like rougher sounding, probably because of like a lot of that like grunge influence and stuff. But Opiate, like it was a good track, and like overall, like it's not a bad album, like you said. I don't hate it, but it's like I probably this wouldn't be one that I go back to often to listen to.
And that was pre like Justin Chancellor, right? I think like their bass player. They're like
Yeah, 'cause it was Paul Diamore, I think, was the first bassist, and then he
because
left.
I feel like their sound is very much defined by their rhythm section. I mean, obviously, like their band is. I mean, like Maynard is very much like the central figure of the band, but
Yeah.
I feel like instrumentally, like the rhythm section, the bass shines through. Danny Carey on drums shines through, and I feel like I didn't get a whole lot of like they didn't really shine on the EP, like the rhythm section.
Yeah, it was a very different mix. Like you could
Yeah,
tell they were still kind of like trying to find their sound,
yeah.
and that.
I feel like they get a little bit more like switching gears. Let's jump into Undertow a little bit because I feel like it's a pretty steep progression between the EP and then Undertow. Like I think there's still that like 90s grunge sound, like that's still heavily present in their music. I mean, they're writing this album in 1993, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
But you start to see like the progressive elements introduced on this record. Every song's over 5 minutes, with some surpassing 7 minutes, and like you get a lot of that type of stuff in progressive music. The like the different build like style, stylistically building or uh, energy instrumentals, all that stuff. Like Sober is a song that I've obviously heard a good bit before that, and I've always liked that song. But hearing it sort of in the context and flow, like the way this record flows, I think actually made me like it more.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely, like, even I like we said, didn't necessarily pay attention to all of the lyrics. Like I tried to absorb it, but Tool songs, like there's a lot going on, a lot to process. So like I don't know if there's an overarching like concept to it, but like the flow of the tracks makes it feel concept in that way. Like you said, like Sober, like where it falls in the album, it does lend to it more than just like listening to that track on its own,
Yeah,
which
and
feels
like
very proggy.
for sure. And I feel like you see a little bit more experimentation with style changes and things like that on this record. And like I was kind of saying, like that slow build, starting low and slow, and sort of building the energy of the song, like a song like Flood on that record. I feel like you see a lot of that style in today's sort of prog rock and prog metal. Not to say that bands like Rush and Yes and King Crimson, and it's not like Tool was the first to do this, but I feel like going
Yeah.
from the EP to the first record, I feel like they really started to kind of adapt more of a progressive direction and sort of discover a sound that distinguished them from like the grunge alt rock that was sort of dominating the rock scene in the early 90s. I don't know if progressive grunge is a thing, but I felt like that's kind of where I would have put them
Grunge.
if that existed. That's kind of, you know, how I would describe that record.
I think also like you said about such a huge difference between the EP and the album in just a year's time. I think not only from like their quality of like musicianship, like they all got a lot better, I think, and like their song structure and writing is better. I think also the actual like recording quality is much better, and like the mixing is more like modern Tool, like on Fear Inoculum. Like obviously there's been, improvement on that with, better gear and more money to invest in it. But I think like the difference between their EP and their first album in a year is just like
Yeah,
it's crazy how much improvement there was
yeah,
between
it was huge jump for sure. And I know, like earlier, I had mentioned this is just another note that I had written down, so I'm just gonna say it anyways. Like earlier, how I mentioned, like, I was a big Audio Slave Chris Cornell fan. Listening to a song like Bottom, I feel like that song to me, I was getting shades of like that self-titled Audio Slave record. So again, sort of discovering the ingredients to a recipe. Like I just was trying to pick things out, and that was one thing that I like took note of. I could be completely off base with that, but that was something that I had picked up on listening to that song Bottom.
It's funny, like you just like the tracks that you've described from the album were all the three favorites of mine: Sober, Bottom, and Flood.
Yeah, those are
And
my
the
three
three,
favorites as well.
nice.
Yeah.
You too are a man of exquisite taste, I see.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, but I enjoyed that record. It again with I started from the EP moving forward, and after the EP I was like, I mean, this is cool, but I don't know if I'm gonna like it. And then with that jump, I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna like some of this. I did like some of this. I added those 3 songs to playlists and stuff, and then how do we say we just pronounce this? Is it Anima?
Yeah, Anima.
All right. We looked it up because it was like I think you were pronouncing it anemia and I was pronouncing it like enema. Like it's anima, I think, is what we came up with based on a very old radio interview on Australian radio show. That's how they said it was pronounced. So that's what we're gonna roll with. So anima. Going into listening to this record, I knew this was kind of like considered their magnum opus by a lot of fans. So I was really trying to like take my time with it. And I went in with high expectations, but also I didn't want to have to like, I really didn't want to have anything bad to say about this record because I didn't want the wrath. And it started off with kind of more of the same stuff from the previous record. Like the song Stink Fist to me is very much just a straightforward 90s alt grunge type sound to it, but like super high energy. Like it was
Yeah.
it was a really solid opening track. And then right after that they just started leaning into that like experimental prog leaning stuff that like was what I had known Tool was from the little bit of exposure I had had to them in the past. So I was like, okay, this is what I had been waiting to hear. And I didn't get a whole lot of that on the first 2, the EP and the first record, but like I was like, okay, this is the sound that I know about Tool. Like this is, I feel like this record really starts to establish that signature like sound with Danny Carey and Justin Chancellor, like that rhythm section, that bass, those bass lines standing out. Danny Carey just the crazy fills on the drums and just masterclass musicianship. And I felt that through this record pretty much start to finish.
Yeah, there were so many good tracks on this one. Like I can see why it's a lot of Tool fans' favorite. Like it's it's their favorite album of the Tool discography because I mean just tracks like H, Eulogy, 46 and 2, Anima, and Third Eye is also like a 13-minute long like prog song at the end of the album. So like there's a lot of cool stuff on this album, and I do like that they much more lean into the prog side of things here. So yeah, this was the one that sort of ignited my interest. So like I enjoyed Undertow, and then Anima was like, man, they're just getting better with each one that we listen to.
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't as steep a progression between the EP and Undertow, but it was still like a jump for me.
Yeah.
One of the things I noted, the song Eulogy. I was a big fan of that. How like that's in the beginning, those like slow building, percussive like polyrhythms they had going on there. It almost made me think of a song like "Swim to the Moon" for a
Yeah.
bit. Like at first, like obviously those two songs are not comparable, but like the way that "Swim to the Moon" builds in the beginning, like that just popped into my brain, so I made that note. There's a little bit of similar song structure with like 46 and 2 as well. But H was definitely my favorite track on the record. I liked sort of the way they bounced between like the spacey ambient tones and like the instrumentals in the verses versus the bridges sort of building into like more powerful tones in the choruses, and like just everything you like about progressive rock. Just the way that they
Crammed
sort of
into
just
one
do all
one
that
track.
shit in one track is just always, takes you on a roller coaster ride. And I really enjoyed that track.
Yeah, that one's cool. I think for Anima, the title. Well, I was gonna say the title track, but I think it's actually spelled differently than the album name. So I'm not sure if it's technically the title track, and I don't want to call
Yeah,
it that and be wrong. So
right. There's probably some real in-depth reason why that's the case. Or there's not, and just Spotify spelled it wrong.
yeah, that's possible. I have noticed that between Apple Music and Spotify, some of the bands have like the song name is capitalized in one, and in another it's all lowercase and stuff. So I don't know like what's up with that. It could be like a typo, but
Right. That's funny.
blame
Yeah.
Apple Music if
I
that's
honestly, until you pointed it out, I didn't even recognize that that was the thing. So,
well, I was trying to get into the Tool mindset and be like,
right.
everything means something.
Need to analyze it all.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's a reason for that, but
Yeah, I'm sure there is, and I'm sure someone could explain it to us if you
maybe it
know
has
and you want to
something to do with
throw
the
it.
last track is Third Eye, and maybe it's I like the letter I. And
That'd be weird. Are there only no? There's no way.
yeah.
Okay, there's not. I mean, I was like, oh, I don't doubt it, but then I was like, there's definitely more than
Well, there's
three eyes in the.
yeah. I was gonna say there's one in 46 and two,
Yeah. All right.
one in
That's
30.
not
Yeah,
that.
so that's
That's
not
not
it. But
that.
I was
All
like,
right.
I don't know. I was trying to big brain it, you know.
I appreciate it. I appreciate that. Yeah. I very much enjoyed this record. I totally get why this is held in high regard.
It's crazy how good it still is with like looking back on it with a modern lens. Like, it wasn't
Yeah.
like, as far as I know, the version that we listened to was the 96 version, not like a remastered,
Yeah.
re-recorded anything. So like it sounds pretty damn good for a 96 record. And like, if I hadn't listened to them and didn't see the date in front of me, like I wouldn't have guessed that this is like a almost 20-year-old record.
Yeah. For sure. But then, if they sort of established their like signature sound on this record, which I feel that they did,
Yeah, I think so too.
I feel like they perfected it on Lateralis.
I would agree. I would agree. I think while I think I have more like favorite tracks on Anima, I think the fewer favorite tracks I have on Lateralis I like more. Like they weight higher for me. So I think overall I ended up liking Lateralis more because it was kind of like you said, they like found their sound, and then this was them like refining it and
I
like
mean,
getting deep in there.
the bass line in Schism is still to this day one of the most iconic bass lines in
Yeah.
all
Like the
music.
first note, you hear the
Yeah.
bass tone and you're like, "Yep, that's Tool."
So like, yeah, and it's funny, like I listened to this record while I was cutting my grass, and as soon as that bass line kicked in, I was just like, oh, like just in the context of the record too. It just like I had always heard it one off. Like, I mean, what's crazy to me, and like this is no, I'm not necessarily going down a rabbit hole. But what's crazy to me is the fact that this shit got radio play. Like Tool gets radio play. How many monthly listeners do they have on Spotify? Like, how is like they're not. How is I mean, sorry, my brain is like freaking
Too
going
many
crazy
thoughts.
because it's like, how is this mainstream in a way?
Yeah.
Like I feel like it, especially like even in the like I heard them on the radio in the '90s, like or in like the early 2000s, late '90s, early 2000s, like
yeah, they played them on the X
yeah,
quite a bit.
like most of the stuff we listen to doesn't get radio play, and I mean obviously Sirius XM and stuff like that, but that shit didn't exist back then. Like, you know, it doesn't get like this type of stuff usually doesn't get radio play, so it's interesting, and like. I know people who don't listen to this type of music at all.
Yeah.
Who know Tool, listen to Tool, know Tool songs. Like,
yeah, it seemed like they got hooked like because of like the grunge stuff, and then they sort of like
I could see that.
Like kind of like, oh well, this is kind of grunge, and then started listening to them and like, cool, I like Tool, but then like never went beyond into like the other prog bands.
That's just something that's like. Especially listening through their discography, you know, I had heard the popular songs before that, but like listening through their discography and just thinking to myself, like, how like it's good. I like, you know, I like it. People like, you know, you and me who listen to, you know, progressive metal, progressive rock, whatever. Like, I can understand us being fans. It's weird to me that like, you know,
it has such a mass appeal.
The girl that lived in my dorm listened to, you know what I mean? Like it's stuff like that. Like the who also listens to like, I don't know, like 30 Seconds to Mars and
yeah, it is like
you know what I mean? Like it's just interesting.
Yeah, there's a interesting crossover with like Tool fans. It's just like it sort of transcends genres somehow.
Yeah, it's interesting, but that's just so I just randomly was like I just need to throw this out there because it blows my mind that, you know, I mean, Coheed and Cambria has a lot of sort of mainstream popularity, but also they write pop songs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Tool so is like it's purposely not writing pop songs.
Right. So it's like that makes sense. It's like, okay, Coheed's a prog rock band that writes pop songs. Like Tool doesn't. Yeah. I've not heard anything in their discography that I'm like, oh, this makes sense. This like, oh, the light bulb is on. Like now I get it. Like not one song.
Yeah, it's like I mean I think like just the way Maynard is like I can't imagine a world where he writes a pop song unless it's like a tongue in cheek like I hate pop and I'm going to make a pop song to make fun of pop or something like.
Right, which bands do that sometimes, but like
yeah,
I don't think I could ever see him doing that, but yeah, it's I don't know, man. It's
also just
mind blowing.
Just talking about mind blowing, like this whole like concept of this album or like the theming and stuff with like the title track using the Fibonacci sequence for like the vocal cadence.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Is wild to me, and like the time signature too. I was reading about that it's like the time signature they use is like was it like I forget, it was like 8 if they did it in like 8, 7 and 9 or some order of the
also like Fibonacci numbers.
Yeah, that it's like some number in the Fibonacci sequence, and then they also did like the vocal like syllables in the Fibonacci sequence too. Is just like, who thinks of this?
Yeah, that's crazy.
I'm sure there's also like more crazy like outlandish stuff on this album and the other ones, but that was one thing that I had like heard before listening to the album, and I also like dug into it more because I'm like, I think I remember there being something about crazy like math stuff on this album.
It's wild, and again, how is that like mainstream shit? But anyways, like
yeah,
to me this record too sounds a lot more massive, like a lot heavier than the previous release. like than Anima. Like I think Lateralis gets a little bit like has a little bit of heavier tones. There's even some like double kick mixed in, some harsher vocals mixed in. I think the guitar tones in general are a little bit heavier.
I also got some. There's like it wasn't a heavy influence, but and maybe not an influence, but I felt at times there was some kind of like doom metal,
Yeah.
like chuggier, like had like a fuzz pedal with like a chuggy like kind of droning riff in there, and it kind of gave me some of that like doom metal vibes too, which was like kind of new.
Yeah. Yeah. I also wrote a note, Haken question mark. Which I assume my brain meant like some of the tracks that I was listening to on Lateralis reminded me of like Haken records.
Like, you left yourself a cryptic note.
I did.
You went in full Tool brain there. Was just like leaving yourself cryptic clues.
But it is interesting, like listening to like Haken records. I get a lot of some of the like less heavy stuff from. I mean, not that Haken's even all that heavy, but I get a lot of Tool vibes. So it's like, I mean, reverse engineered, right? So it's like listening to Tool, I was like, oh, I'm reminded of Haken, which means Haken reminds me of Tool since Tool came first. So it's like, reverse engineered, whatever.
It's but like Haken probably got some influence from Tool, I would assume.
Yeah, like I honestly want to go back and listen to like after listening to Lateralis, I want to go back and listen to a couple Haken records to like just solidify my Haken question mark note. But yeah, I mean, I would be interested to know if Haken pulls any influence from Tool, like claims to. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of bands will claim or will pull that influence and not necessarily claim it, but it's like what you listen to.
There.
Yeah, what
subtly.
You listen to really lends to what you write oftentimes. So, but yeah, no, I think Lateralis might also be like their peak for me. Because then we switch into 10,000 Days, which was their next release. I didn't know if you have anything else to say about Lateralis, we can throw it out there.
Just basically, my favorite tracks from that album were Schism, Parabola, and the title track, Lateralis.
Those are also my favorite tracks. That Schism bass line is just something else.
Yeah, it's no matter how many times you listen to it, it's always good. Yeah, I love the mix that Tool has. Like I love that it's kind of rhythm forward, and that's probably coming from someone who, I mean, I haven't admittedly been able to play much lately, but trying to learn to play bass. It's like that riff is just like I think inspires many people to pick up and learn a bass.
Yeah.
So that probably coming from that mindset is why I enjoy the rhythm forward stuff, but it's also not super common either, I think. So I really enjoy that from that record. But
yeah, and to me, like that bass line is just as iconic in this type of music as like Bleed from Meshuggah, like that intro. Like like to me, it's very much like in the same vein.
Yeah, there's like a handful of those different riffs that is like these most people would know. And I feel like Schism is a more popular one. Like you said, we were saying earlier that, because they play Tool on the radio, that you could have someone who's like not a prog rock or metal fan that would be like, oh, that's Schism or whatever.
Right. Yep.
And whereas like Bleed by Meshuggah is like a bit heavier and stuff that like you probably less people would be like, oh, that's Bleed.
Right. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I do feel like this was like peak Tool. And then they came out with 10,000 Days, which what was the release date on that? Because wasn't there like a 5-year wait or something, or maybe even longer than that?
It went Lateralis was 2001 and 10,000 Days was 2006. It was a roughly 5-year gap.
So I feel like this record still maintains some of that like heavy vibe that they established on Lateralis. Obviously, they keep that defined sound. There's still a lot of that, rhythm section really standing out. to me, it just wasn't necessarily as memorable as Lateralis on my listen through of this
Yeah.
record.
That's kind of where it landed for me too. It's like it was really good, and I'm sure like at the time people waiting for a new Tool album probably were pretty hyped on it, and like I thought it was a great album, but didn't hit quite as hard as Lateralis did.
Yeah, I like the two part, like Wings for Marie and then the 10,000 Days, like the title track, like Wings Part 2. Like I liked that. I honestly, that whole section, track 3 to track 5, I was a fan because The Pot was, I think, probably my favorite song on the record.
Yeah, that's mine too.
But I was getting a lot of like, and again, all the references that I give are like people who clearly would have taken influence from this, not the other way around. But like I was getting a lot of like almost Deftones type sound on this record.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah,
don't
this
know if
and that would
that's
make sense too because it's like early 2000s, so that would be kind of like that, you're getting into the like the new metal and stuff like that age of music, so that
yeah,
would make sense
I guess that would make sense. I didn't really like even think of that
for
way.
that
But
influence because I feel like that was like and Deftones is another band that like I really enjoy but haven't listened to like their whole discography, so maybe that could be a future dive as well, but I feel like that's probably around the time that they were
yeah,
taking off.
while they like still kept that sound, I did feel a little bit like the drums were kind of not as not as much of a standout on this record in my like. Maybe I'm just like that's what I noted down. Maybe I need to listen to it again. I'm not trying to get anyone mad at me because I think a lot of people actually really really revere this record too. So I'm trying to like tiptoe around this, but I don't know. I just felt like some songs like they build a lot more like what Deftones does, like that sort of ambient, like darker ambient sound versus like not as right in your face, like with the drums and stuff, that I feel like, I don't know, I feel like they almost got buried by the soundscape that they were trying to build, which is like a different direction. Maybe it's a little more experimental, which is
Yeah.
cool. Like I don't have a problem with experimenting. That's kind of like one of the big things in progressive music, but I don't know.
Yeah, I do think like 10,000 Days had a little more of the like atmospheric kind of like airy feel to it, whereas Lateralis was more like heavy, chuggier, kind of like balls to the wall kind of, you know, type of
Right.
sound. And it seems like they sort of like backed off and went more like heady, spacey stuff in 10,000 Days, which I also enjoy. So like I enjoyed this album, but I think like you said, Lateralis just kind of
It's just a different
hits harder.
vibe. It's a
Yeah.
different vibe. Like it's that more like dark ambient ethereal, like let's like
Ethereal, that's a good word to describe it.
they tried to do something different, and it's a good record. Like I enjoy like this is really the only record that I probably won't necessarily go back and listen to. Like the EP is probably the only thing I won't necessarily go back and listen to. Like there's still stuff on Undertow.
Yeah.
I just sneezed. Sorry about that. There's still some stuff on Undertow that I like that I added to playlists, but like I would listen to this record front to back again. I just don't think. I think with how much I vibed with Lateralis, this was just like a step back. It was different. It was different,
Yeah.
but still has staying power. Like songs like Lost Keys, that I think that really sort of a song like that really sort of helps to illustrate like the sound that I'm like the vibe that I'm getting really throughout the whole record. Just that dark ambient stuff, like, but like not as much drums, not as much. I don't know. I
Yeah.
feel like
More space
I feel like
to it.
yeah, I feel like Danny Carey is such like instrumentally like is the guy, right, for Tool, and it was weird to me that they kind of, to me, or at least with my first listen through, again I will listen again, he wasn't as featured, like he wasn't featured as much on this record.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think like for me, you said about The Pot being your favorite. That's mine too. I really enjoyed Vicarious and Jambi or Jambi. I don't know how you pronounce it, but
Yeah.
I like those tracks. I think those were more of the ones that like they had a little more remnants of the Lateralis sound, and that's
Yeah.
probably why I liked them more. They were less of the
They experiment with like different instruments across this record too. That's something that I've kind of noticed. I feel like I'm picking up like different different it's not just different tones of the instrument. Like it's not just like a
yeah
different guitar tone. Like there's something else going on in there. Like
yeah. There's like sort of like a like bongo-y kind of
yeah,
like
like the song Right in 2, I put down bongos in my notes.
yeah. I don't know if that's actually like if it was bongos or if it's some other kind of, but it was some sort of like it sounded like a hand played like
Yeah.
type of percussion instrument.
Like I just picture them in a room surrounded by like a bunch of random ass instruments. Like that's what like and
Yeah.
like other bands have done that stuff too. Like other bands that we listen to.
I like that incorporation. Like I think it's cool to like for
Yeah,
them to branch out and stuff. It's cool.
it's like it's especially like knowing Maynard, like having something artsy like this, like an art piece, like almost the experimentation, like art rock, art metal, art prog, like
Yeah.
like I could see you know I'm not against it. It definitely made for some cool moments. I just think it was just a slight step back for me personally.
Yeah, that's probably how I would rank it too. It was like not quite as high as Lateralis. Like there was kind of like Lateralis was peak, and then 10,000 Days was like really good, but not quite as good and stand out as Lateralis was.
Yeah, so like for me the progression up to this point was like we just made a straight up alt rock EP. We sort of started to discover ourselves. We've really established our sound. We've mastered our sound. Now let's get experimental with it. Like that's kind of
Yeah.
like
Yeah, they're
so that's
like,
kind
all
of
right,
like the
well, we don't want to
progression.
just make another like Lateralis 2 and just like do more of the same. How can we like be different, but also still kind of try and keep the sound that made us famous?
Right.
And that's got to be hard to do because you don't want to just put like copy paste the same album. So they're kind of in a weird spot of like, well, we got to do something different.
Yeah. But
And I think it was overly like overall it was successful, just maybe not
yeah, honestly
quite as
like
much as
it's tough for me to decide Lateralis is my favorite Tool record. That's pretty much cemented for me, but like it's tough for me to determine which record I like better between 10,000 Days and Anima.
okay.
And I feel like I like more tracks on Anima overall, but I feel like the experience of 10,000 Days, like start to finish, like as an experimental sort of like art prog record, um, I kind of vibe with it too. Like, I mean, I almost and again, I hate doing this shit, but I'm, because of how like, they came first, but like, I feel like Coma Ecliptic was kind of like between the Bear to Me's like art prog metal piece in a way. Like, and I feel like some people really vibe with it and some people don't.
Yeah.
Like, so I would be curious to know if 10,000 Days for Tool, like, because I've seen people basically say like this is my favorite Tool record, and then I feel like others have like sort of turned their nose up at it. Like I'm curious if that's like common in the Tool fan base.
Yeah, I was like actually like earlier today I was looking at like a Tool Reddit of people being like rank the albums, go. And I kind of saw like a bunch of people have like basically flip Lateralis, Anima, and 10,000 Days, and occasionally Fear Inoculum, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it seemed like often those kind of were like interchanged. It seemed like mostly it was Anima and Lateralis, but I saw like a good portion of people also say like, man, 10,000 Days.
Yeah,
So
and we just like we did an episode for like Deserted Island Records, and we put a like a question out there to the listeners, what are yours? And one of the responses we got had 10,000 Days as one of their Deserted Island records. So not only are they revering that as their favorite Tool record, they're saying, no, this is like one of my top 5 records. Like
of
I
all
want to be
time. Like
I want to be stranded. I want to be stranded on an island with this record. So like, I don't know. I'm curious, as a sort of new Tool fan, I'm curious how that's revered.
I do. I also oftentimes, like, the more I listen to albums and stuff, my rankings will change and like my views on them will change.
Oh yeah.
So it's very possible that, like, while 10,000 Days for me right now wasn't as high on my list as Lateralis, that like maybe after I go through and listen to each of these albums like a second, third, fourth time, that my order will completely change because I'll like have a different experience or something with listening to it and stuff. So
Yeah, but I guess we kind of already established like what our favorite tracks were. That section like 3 to 5, like the Wings for Marie, and then Wings Part 2 with the title track. And then the Pot, like that section for me was most memorable on the record.
yeah,
With the
you're a
Pot
sucker
being
for
my favorite.
the sweet.
I
Part
do like
ones
that
and part
shit.
twos.
I do like that shit for sure. And that's the other thing that we haven't really mentioned is there are like subtle or not even so subtle repeating themes through these Tool records too, that other prog bands do that stuff too. And I haven't been able to really like sit down and sort out all the different places that happens, because I've only listened once through for most of this stuff.
Yeah.
But like I've picked it out in my brain, like, oh, that's so that's pretty cool. I think they do that like lyrically as well, but like I said, I've not at all.
Yeah, the lyrics is something
dive.
I definitely need more time with to get used to or to understand them all and catch those like nuances.
Yeah, for sure. But so that brings us to the famous 13-year disappearance.
Yeah.
Where they just, I don't know, like, I just remember people always do it. Like, I feel like this is where that joke started. Like, you see this pretty often on social media where it's like, they do it with like GTA 6 now, where it's like, oh, we got this before we got GTA 6. Like, I feel like before that was a thing, it was like, oh, we got, this before the new Toll record. Like,
because they like hadn't. I from what I understand, that they had like talked about that they were making the album for a while, so like people knew that it was coming out eventually, but didn't know when, and it was a 13-year gap. So like, kind of like, when is it coming? Is it actually coming, or are they just lying to us?
Right, and then they come back 13 years later and drop like a 10-minute epic title track.
This album is almost an hour and a half long.
Yeah, it's massive.
Which is insane because all their like, I think Lateralis and Anima, I think they're like an hour and 17 minutes. So, which are already like insanely long, and then they came back with like, how about 10 more minutes of music?
And there are 6 tracks on this record that are over 10 minutes long.
Yeah. That is a prog ass album for
with
sure.
With the longest one being almost 16 minutes long.
That's Tempest?
That's Tempest.
Yeah, that's my favorite track.
Yeah, that's also my favorite track. I like the title track
Empist.
Too. Yeah, 7 Empist.
I'm surprised that it isn't track 7 on the album.
It should have been.
Yeah.
That was a missed opportunity. There's probably some reason for that too. Maybe there's a connection to track 7, so that's why they put that. Yeah, who knows? I'd love to know all the nuances.
Even the lyrics on Apple Music spell Tempest 7 Empist.
Huh.
So there has to be some significance that I'm not familiar with, but
yeah. I very much enjoyed this record. I did listen to this record when it came out because I was doing like, were we doing the podcast by then? I forget when our first, it was like,
no, because we didn't do it until we started like during the COVID years.
Yeah.
But this would have still been like in, the
yeah.
people talking about it.
Yeah, and I remember when it came out, like I was doing my own sort of album rankings, so I actually did give this record a listen back then. And I liked it. I definitely didn't give it as much, the time of day that I probably should have. Because I think I still had that sort of it's Tool, whatever, like, I'm like, but like
you're too good for them.
not even that I was too good for them. It was just like I had never like given their back catalog a listen, so I felt like dirty, like listening to their new. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. But I enjoyed it. The long songs are a little bit daunting, but as a prog fan, I like that type of stuff. So I can't imagine that this song, all the casuals, I'm sure hate this record.
You think so?
I would think. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I feel like writing, I don't know, like writing long songs, like giving people like, oh, I got to sit down and, oh, this is still the same song 10 minutes later. Like,
yeah.
I feel like you see a lot of people in the mainstream complain about stuff like that. I could be wrong, but I feel like this probably lost a lot of casuals.
That could be. It's also like
the person in my dorm listening to 30 Seconds to Mars does not like this record. Like that would be my guess. Like I don't know.
This I feel like they also this felt like a progression from 10,000 Days despite it being like a 13-year hiatus. Like I think they did a lot of the ambient sound as well, like they kept a lot of that. But I think they did though add back like more drum and bass, like the rhythm section.
Yeah.
Like they kind of amped that up, but they're like, let's keep the ambient stuff from 10,000 Days, but change the mix back to Lateralis era.
Yeah, and I felt like a lot of the like guitar tones were a lot more modernized, which makes sense. It's 13 years later, and there's a lot of new technology out there for that type of stuff. But I did think the mix in general was a lot more modern sounding. I agree they didn't abandon the sort of ambient, spacey, ethereal themes, song or styles, soundscapes, whatever you want to call it. But they brought the drums back. So it was almost like an improvement in a way from 10,000 Days, but I won't lie, I kind of like 10,000 Days a little bit better.
That's fair.
But it's close. I feel like, honestly, Lateralis is the standout record for me. And then between Anima, 10,000 Days, and Fear Inoculum, like they're all like 2A, 2B, 2C. Like, and I could see those shuffling around a good bit. Like with more, like spending more time with the records.
Yeah, I honestly like it. It's tough to rank these. I think, like we were saying earlier, I think it was like they continuously got better, and then Lateralis was kind of like peak, and then I felt like 10,000 Days was like them experimenting with something new, and then I felt like Fear Inoculum was kind of them like, we're going to try and perfect this new sound that we just made 13 years ago. But like we found a new thing. We like this. Let's make this better. So kind of in my eyes, it was Lateralis is my number one. And then probably Anima, then Fear Inoculum, 10,000 Days, Undertow, and then the Opiate EP is my current standing. Like you were saying, it could definitely change with more listens, but that's kind of my rank.
Yeah, I would say mine is just right this minute. Mine
would change
probably
after by the time you finish the list.
Mine would probably be Lateralis, Anima, 10,000 Days, Fear Inoculum, Undertow, and then the EP would probably.
So yours is like very similar to mine, just flipping 10,000 Days and Fear Inoculum.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Probably where I'm at right now. I think it could change. If I spent more, I feel like I didn't give Fear Inoculum a fair enough shake even in this go around, because I feel like the long songs, the way that I was listening to the record wasn't very, didn't lend to the length of the song and the way, like, in the sense of like I was zoning out a bit. You know what I mean? Like I was doing other things while I was listening to it, and then just jotting down notes as I listened.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's
and
probably also the nature of doing it in chronological order and getting to that
yeah,
album last after having
right,
listened to like 6 hours of Tool
yeah, it
leading
was a
up to
lot.
it. And then
It
you're
was a
like,
lot of
and there
Tool,
are
and I was
several
replaying
10.
some songs too.
Yeah. So it was like, I've listened to 7 hours of Tool, and now you're telling me I've got three like 10+ minute songs on here. I could see
Yeah,
how that would be
it was
like,
definitely daunting. That record is daunting, but like
yeah.
as a prog fan, you embrace that type of shit. But uh, yeah, it was definitely it's definitely a record I need to go listen to again. But what I heard, I definitely enjoyed. I liked sort of the modernization of, and it is kind of like a combination a little bit between like Lateralis and 10,000 Days, and I like the modernization of their sound. So I could see that sort of jumping 10,000 Days. I could probably even potentially see it jumping Anima, but I do think, I don't know, 46 and 2 is such a good song. H is such a good song. That's probably a top 5 Tool song for me right now.
H.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is really good. That was one that I went back and listened to a few times.
So, yeah, this was fun, dude. I like doing stuff like this, especially when it's like, oh yeah, I recognized more songs as I listened. So like I clearly had heard more than I thought I did. But like going into this, I was like, I know like maybe 5 Tool songs,
Yeah. I
and
like it when we both don't really have a lot of experience with the band, and then it feels like we both are kind of discovering the stuff together, and then we on the podcast get to talk about kind of what we both discovered and took away from it, instead of it being like one of us already has like a decent knowledge of the band, so then it feels more like one person is guiding the other one, being like, oh well, this one, and like kind of leading the other person along. But this was like we were both in uncharted territory together, kind of.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's cool. Like, yeah, usually when we do these, we've heard most of the stuff. So like, this was like discovering. This is really discovering new music. Like,
Yeah, it's like we knew of the band obviously, and we had heard
right.
several of their tracks, but like I would say probably 90% or more of the discography I hadn't heard at all.
Yeah, yeah, easily
Yeah.
90%. And yeah, I've heard 5 songs and I just listened to the 7 hours worth of music. So it's like,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. So it's like, yeah, it's a lot. But it was enjoyable. I liked it a lot more. I didn't necessarily expect to come out of this and be like, oh, I'm a fan of this. I'm a
And
fan
it
of
was like
Tool.
you messaged me of like,
Yeah,
I think I'm becoming a Tool fan.
I did. Literally after listening to like, I think that I sent that after listening to Anima. I was just like,
Yeah.
oh, I think I'm a Tool fan. So yeah, I mean, two major emotions. I was like disappointment because like I didn't discover them earlier. Like not that I didn't discover them, I knew who they were, but like I didn't take the time to really like explore their catalog earlier. Like so disappointment, but then also like gratitude. Like shout out to whom I don't even remember. I wish I knew who it was. Whoever the first person was to like tell us to do this.
I think would we even be able to check that? Because I think it
I
was
don't
in
know.
like
I'll
a
have to look.
story poll that you
Yeah, I
did
think it was. I might be able
that
to pull
someone
that up,
suggested.
but like whoever you were, thank you. This was cool, and now I have old new music to listen
Yeah,
to.
and feel free to message us so we can give you your proper
Yeah,
direct kudos.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this was a lot of fun. I'm glad we did this. Definitely gonna do Dream Theater one of these days, and we owe somebody else doing After the Burial. So
Yeah,
uh, I just keep putting
that
that
would be a
off
fun
so
one
that
too.
I can keep telling everybody that In Dreams is still the best After the Burial record. I refuse to budge until proven wrong, but I was proven wrong with Tool, so I guess we'll see. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is there anything else you want to throw out there?
No, it's I appreciate the suggestions that got us into doing this episode. So, I know we say it all the time in like our posts on Instagram and in the podcast. Like we love the feedback and suggestions and stuff. It helps us with like making content that both clearly like you're interested in hearing, and it's a fun experience for us to kind of dig through different bands and discographies and stuff. So feel free to hit us up, like either respond in comments or even just send us a direct message being like, hey guys, please do this,
Yeah.
because we love it.
And one thing I was thinking about recently too, and this is just me having a conversation with you, Matt, at this point, because this is something that I would have talked to you off the podcast, but it just came into my head, so I'm going to say it now. Like, it might be cool to do like a Q&A type thing, like post send us your questions and then do an episode where we just basically answer those questions on
Yeah,
the
that's
episode. Cool. And nothing. I mean, there would obviously be things off limits. Let's try to keep it to music, but but like I feel like that could be kind of cool. So maybe we'll throw something out there, just gathering some questions for a future episode. And we'll give you guys a shout out too for whomever such and such asked this question versus just like whatever.
Yeah, we'll make sure to record it.
Yeah,
this time.
Yeah, exactly.
Give you proper credit.
But I feel like that could be cool. Again, go follow the YouTube page if you are not following us already or subscribed already, because we're planning on doing some live stream stuff on there. I feel like that could be cool.
Yeah, live stream stuff for the podcast. We also do the game streaming stuff, which currently we've been doing pretty much every Friday. I think there have been like maybe one or two that we didn't, but we generally do it. It's Friday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So, we have like the thing so you can, we set up the event and you can, have it notify you when we go live. But we would like to also do some podcast related, just like straight up music, like kind of live stream session stuff as well. Figure out a way to incorporate and kind of a format for that.
Yeah. And we'll, while we're even on the gaming channel, usually like Matt or myself, and then Brandon is the host of the gaming channel, and he also listens to all this stuff too. And, we're happy to interact and answer questions and stuff on there too. Like that can even be a makeshift Q&A. So, feel free to, and that can, extend into the gaming universe as well, but, can also be music related, what'd you think of this new record? Or, have you even heard of this new record? Because then that gives us a reason to go discover more new music. So selfishly, please do that. But
we kind of like try to like that's kind of the intent of the gaming thing is to like blend it with our interests, because I know there's a lot of overlap between like prog nerds and gaming nerds, and there's a lot of overlap there. So we kind of wanted to try and make like a community as far as like, hey, I enjoy video games and progressive music, and you can talk about either or both, and just come on over, say hi, watch us game, and all that stuff. Feel free to chat and make some friends.
Join in with the gaming sometimes. Like I feel like that's something that we're trying to extend as well. So, but also as far as the podcast is concerned too, like we might do some like live interviews, live Q&As with some bands, artists, whatever. We have some that we are in contact with that are interested. So I feel like that's something that could be cool. So I would say just if you could, it's a nice way to sort of support us, and it's free, huh? Just go hit that subscribe button.
Yeah.
And that way you don't miss any of that content, and it's going to be cool. And, we have some cool potential guests lined up. So that's another thing that we want to get back into as well at some point when we have time to breathe, is, get back into the interview space. We took such a crazy dive, getting Aviations and Jim Gray from Caligula's Horse and Exploring Birdsong and all the great bands that we've already interviewed, and then it was just like, all right, now we're just we just have another time. It sucked, but to all the bands that we've been in contact with about getting on the podcast, I'm sorry that it's been such a delay to get you guys on, but we're hoping to get things rolling again here soon. So we will probably be in touch, and I think that's enough word vomit, and I think we can go ahead and go about our lives, and hopefully we'll talk to you guys again soon, and thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.